Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Colin Muscat, and I'm chair of the Jewish Federation of Edmonton's Holocaust Education Committee. Thank you for joining us this afternoon to commemorate Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. Ceremonies such as this are being held all over the world today as we honor and remember those who perished in the Holocaust and those who survived one of humankind's darkest moments. Today we stand together and say, never again. We are grateful to be gathering on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for many Indigenous people, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others. The Jewish Federation of Edmonton respects the sovereignty, lands, histories, languages, knowledge systems, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit nations. Can we all please rise and join the Tamatora Choir in the singing of O Canada? Please welcome Stephen Schaefer, the immediate past president of the Jewish Federation of Edmonton and chair of the Community Relations Committee.
Thank you, Colin. On behalf of the Jewish Federation of Edmonton, I would like to welcome all dignitaries and guests of today's ceremony, and in particular, the Honorable Senator Paula Simons, the Honorable Nathan Cooper, Speaker of the Legislature, the Honorable Minister of Status of Women, Whitney Izek, the Honorable Minister of Municipal Affairs, Rick McIver, the Honorable Associate Minister of Immigration and Multiculturalism, Mohammed Yassin, the Honorable Minister of Seniors, Josephine Pon, MLAs Leela Ahir, Lauren Dack, David Egan, Shane Getson, Richard Gottfried, David Hansen, Janice Irwin, Todd Lowen, Nathan Newdorf, Rachel Notley, Raki Pancholi, Angela Pitt, Roger Reed, Brad Rutherford, Marlon Schmidt, David Shepard, Lori Sigurdsson, Dan Williams, Tanny Yao, and I believe there are many others, and I apologize for not mentioning you. Mayor Amarjeet Sohi, Councillor Sarah Hamilton, representatives from the Honorable Minister Randy Boissonneau's office and of the federal NDP, friends from the Rwandan community represented by John-Yves Ributso, President of the Memory Keepers Association of the 1994 genocide perpetrated against the Tutsis of Rwanda, friends of the Ukrainian community represented by Arissa Boychuk, President, and Kira Baczynski, Secretary of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, Alberta Provincial Council. Again, I apologize if I have missed anybody. I am the grandson of a man who 77 and 78 years ago was not known by a name, but rather by a number, A11699, tattooed on his arm as he'd entered Auschwitz. Decency was taken from him, his family torn apart, robbed, assaulted, and murdered solely because of who they were, Jews. My story is not unique. It is the fabric of our community. The atrocities of Auschwitz, Birkenau, Treblinka, Chelmno, Buchenwald, and Sobibor, the murders at Babi Yar and in every city, town, and village throughout Europe will be carried with us as a people forever. 6 million Jews, including 1 million children, were systematically murdered at the hands of the Nazis and their collaborators. I, unfortunately, am the last generation to have known Holocaust survivors as a major part of our community. Their history, their memories need to be preserved. We must never forget their stories, as they are our history. Today, we remember the victims. We must honor and remember, because as Elie Wiesel said, without memory, there would be no civilization, no future. It is our duty to remember the Holocaust. By remembering the horrors of the Holocaust, we can work together to prevent them from happening again. Over the last year, our community has been shaken by anti-Semitism near and far to an extent that has not been seen in decades. We saw some disgusting behavior right here in this province. On 2 separate rural properties in northern Alberta, flags with swastikas were found. At rallies throughout the past year, including this past weekend right across the street over here, placards were held up by those purporting to be marching in support of the Palestinian cause that said Hitler was right. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which is a call for the elimination of Jews. Youth leaving the May rallies in support of Palestine went door to door in neighborhoods in Edmonton, looking for Jews and seeking altercation. At anti-vaccine rallies across this province, too often, yellow stars of David were worn, and the actions of our government were equated with the actions of Nazi Germany. In Leviticus, it says, Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha, ani Adonai, which translates to, love your neighbor as you love yourself. I am the Lord your God. Rashi, the rabbinic scholar, went on to say that this is the most fundamental principle of the Torah. The Holocaust started because people stopped loving their neighbors. It started with rhetoric, with words, and actions against Jews, and increased and ultimately led to the planned annihilation of our people. Anti-Semitic rhetoric and actions are again becoming more common with the fading memory of the Holocaust's horrors. Now is the time that we need to call on the City of Edmonton and the province of Alberta to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism. We must also call for mandatory Holocaust education in our schools. We must never forget what happened to our people, and we must never let it happen again. We say never again. We need to use these words as a rallying cry for our community and for all Albertans. Let us remember and mourn the victims of the Holocaust, but also use the lessons learned to speak up for a more just society, free from discrimination and hate, whether it be against our community or against others. Far too often, people remain marginalized and attacked for who they are. I want to take this time to thank the Government of Alberta and the City of Edmonton personally and on behalf of our community for speaking up on each occasion where our community has been attacked and for meeting with us promptly to discuss our concerns. I'd like to now welcome Stephanie Sordo to speak on behalf of the Honorable Randy Boissonnault, Minister of Tourism and Associate Minister of Finance, who is planning to attend today but was called to Ottawa.
Good afternoon, everyone. Zarachim Tovim. My name is Stephanie, and I'm here on behalf of Minister Randy Boissonnault. Unfortunately, the minister was called back to Ottawa today for a very important announcement, and he has asked me to read a statement from him and the federal government on Yom HaShoah. Yesterday, Jewish communities in Edmonton, across Canada and around the world, observed Yom HaShoah to remember the 6 million innocent Jewish men, women, and children who were systematically murdered at the hands of the Nazis, and to commemorate the resilience of the survivors. The Holocaust was one of the darkest moments in human history and will forever leave a moral stain on humanity. In Israel, sirens sounded as the nation paused to pray. Jewish communities around the world gathered in synagogues to recite the Mourner's Kaddish and the El Maleh Rachamim with one voice of strength, resiliency, and love. They gather with the same voice of resiliency echoed by those who acted in resistance to the Nazis, from those who fought back in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in 1943 to the Jewish men and women who parachuted into Eastern Europe to deliver aid, to those who put pen to paper, recording not just words, but their hopes and dreams. Anne Frank wrote, "How wonderful is it that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world." I am in awe, as we all are, of the wisdom expressed by such a young girl at such a terrifying time. Wisdom that I know all of us here can learn from, especially as we see the rise of anti-Semitic attacks here in Canada and around the world. An attack against the Jewish community is an attack against all of us. Last year, to strengthen Holocaust education, remembrance, and research, the Government of Canada appointed the Honourable Irwin Cotler to undertake the critical task of serving as Canada's special envoy on preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism. We have also supported the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism by adopting it as part of our anti-racism strategy. Canada must remain vigilant in working with our domestic and international partners to apply the lessons from the past to prevent such atrocities from ever happening again. We all have a collective responsibility and obligation to remember the Holocaust, educate the future generations to come, and always vow never again. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I would now like to welcome the Honorable Whitney Isaac, Associate Minister of the Status of Women, to share greetings on behalf of the provincial government and to read the provincial Holocaust Proclamation.
Good afternoon. It is an honor to be with you today on Yom HaShoah. Today, we pause to remember the lives that were taken during the systemic murder of the Jewish population. It's imperative that we do so. We are just 11 years away from 2033, which will mark 100 years since the first Nazi concentration camps began to implement the most horrific genocide the world has ever known. The Shoah, the Holocaust as we know it in English, killed more than 6 million Jewish people. The Nazi state embraced the pernicious hatred of anti-Semitism and destroyed countless lives through the acts of pure evil the world cannot forget, that the world must not forget. The great chronicler of the Holocaust, and I know this has been quoted earlier, Elise Wiesel wrote, "Forgetting is never an option. Remembering is a noble and necessary act. The call of memory, the call to memory, reaches us from the very dawn of history. No commandment figures so frequently, so insistently in the Bible. It is incumbent upon us to remember the good we have received and the evil we have suffered." Despite the remains of Nazi death camps, the documentation of Nazi programs like Kristallnacht, the perpetrators who were tried and found guilty for this crime against humanity, despite all of this, the world is at risk of forgetting. Those who bore witness to the Shoah, who lived through the horrors, who experienced the evils of the Nazi regime firsthand, are few in number today. Throughout their lives, they shared their stories with us. But as their voices fall silent, it must be us who continue to keep their memories and their stories alive. We must never allow the world to forget what happened. It is our responsibility to stand against the hate of anti-Semitism. It is our moral duty to ensure that the free world never again allows something like this to happen. That is why we must listen. We must listen to the words and stories of survivors. We must keep their stories alive for generations to come. That is why today is so important. Yom HaShoah is a day in which we remember those murdered in the extraordinary evil of the Holocaust. We remember their humanity, their lives as ordinary people whose greatest crime was simply existing. We remember their stories from well-known records, like Anne Frank's diary, which showed us how a 15-year-old girl had to put her hopes and dreams on hold as her family tried to hide from the Nazis, to artifacts like the braids of 12-year-old Lily Hirsch that are kept at Yad Vashem. Lily's hair had not been cut since she was a small child, but her mother knew that she wouldn't be able to take care of her daughter's hair, so they cut Lily's braids, only on the condition that they would be preserved for her. Those braids were kept safe. Lily and her mother Rivka were murdered at Auschwitz just weeks later. When her father and brother returned to their home in September 1945, everything was destroyed. The only thing that remained were Lily's braids. As I mentioned, today those braids are at Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center in Israel. They are a reminder of the depths of the evils of the Nazis, a lasting memento of the horrors of the Holocaust, and a reminder to see the smiling face of Lily, a beautiful 12-year-old girl whose life was stolen from her, when we remember those murdered in the Shoah. Those braids help to keep her memory alive, and her memory is a blessing to us all. We stand united today to commemorate the lives lost during the Shoah, lives like young Lily and her mother. But so too must we stand together every day and bring truth to the words, never again. I will now read the proclamation. Whereas the Holocaust was the state-sponsored, systematic persecution and annihilation of European Jewish men, women, and by the Nazis and their collaborators between 1933 and 1945, and this horrific event is part of our common history as citizens of this earth. Whereas the Nazis and their collaborators murdered 6 million Jewish people, including more than 1 million children, during that time of persecution and death. Whereas the Nazis and their collaborators also persecuted and murdered millions of other people because of their race, religion, level of physical or mental ability, or sexual orientation. Whereas during World War II, Albertans bravely served as members of the Canadian Armed Forces, and many Albertans paid the ultimate price, their lives, to protect and preserve freedom and democracy. Whereas Shoah is the Hebrew term for Holocaust. Whereas it is fitting and right to observe Yom HaShoah, the day of the Holocaust, as a day to remember the victims and survivors of the Holocaust and to honor those who fought to defeat tyranny and genocide. Whereas this day provides Albertans with the opportunity to look within themselves, reflect on the enduring lessons of the Holocaust, and educate their children, their colleagues, and their fellow citizens on the perils of hatred. To consider other times and incidents of systematic violence, genocide, persecution, racism, and hatred that call out to us from the past and continue today. And to reaffirm their commitment to uphold the human rights of all and to value diversity and the multicultural richness of Alberta society. Whereas on Yom HaShoah, we will remember, for we must never forget. Therefore, Her Majesty, by and with the advice and the consent of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta, enacts as follows. Yom HaShoah, the day of the Holocaust, as determined in each year by the Jewish lunar calendar, is proclaimed as Holocaust Memorial Day. Yom HaShoah.
Thank you, Minister Isaac. I would now like to welcome the Honorable Paula Simons, Senator, to say a few words.
Hello, bonjour en français. It is such an honor and a grace to be here with you today in Emiskwache, Waskahegan, for me to stand with family and friends to remember. I want to tell you a story. 2 years ago, not long after I became a senator, I had a chance to visit the National Library and Archives of Canada and to see an extraordinary artifact that the museum there had just acquired. It was a book about the size and the shape of a Haggadah, but it was not a Haggadah. It was a private, secure document which was prepared for Adolf Hitler his guide to where to find the Jews of North America. It had been prepared by German intelligence based on immigration records and census documents. And in it, it listed all the Jewish communities of Canada and where they could be found, their Jewish leaders. I held that book, which had in the front the Ex Libris Adolf Hitler book plate. And I flipped open the pages to look at the Alberta Census information, which informed me, as it had informed Hitler in 1942, that there were 1,057 Jews living in Edmonton at that time. Now, I've known about the Holocaust my entire life, as the daughter of a Jewish father and a German mother. But it wasn't until I held that book that Hitler had held, and saw the enumeration of the Jews of Edmonton, who in 1942 would have included my grandfather of blessed memory, my grandmother of blessed memory, my father, his brothers, and his sister, all of whom were living in Edmonton at that time, that the Holocaust became real and personal to me in a way it never had before. A reminder that this wasn't just something that happened there to them, but something that could have happened here and to us. And as I stood there in that library holding that book, that publication of enduring evil, it was a reminder to me that the Holocaust, although particular and unique, that anti-Semitism is not particular and unique to the Germans of the 1930s and the 1940s. It endures as a political toxin on the left and a right across this globe. And it was a reminder to me, too, that genocide, although here we remember the Holocaust, is not something that is unique to the Jewish experience. The Haggadah tells us that the Holy One, blessed be He, brought us forth from bondage in Egypt with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. And as Canadians, and particularly as Canadian Jews, but as Canadians of all stripes, it is up to us now to be that strong hand and that outstretched arm, to open Canada to those who need to come, whether they are coming from Rwanda or Burma or Afghanistan or Eritrea or Ukraine. To remember that the words never forget are hollow unless we make them as vivid and real as Tikkun Olam tells us that we must. So thank you very much, all of you, for inviting me here today to share in this remarkable ceremony and to remind us all of the duty we owe to all those who came before us and to all the victims of the Shoah, that their memories may forever be a blessing and an inspiration to us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Simons. I would now like to welcome Ann Goldblatt on behalf of Heather McPherson, MP, to share greetings from the federal NDP.
On behalf of Heather McPherson, I'm pleased to bring greetings from Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the Federal New Democratic Party. Dear friends, I would like to thank the Holocaust Education Committee of the Jewish Federation of Edmonton for their dedicated work in organizing this annual ceremony to commemorate Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day. On this solemn day, I join in paying tribute to the 6 million Jewish people who were victims of genocide during the Second World War. It is a truth the world can never forget. We also remember the millions of Slavs, ethnic Poles, Romani people, disabled people, and gay men who were murdered for simply being who they were. While the horrors suffered by these innocent people will forever haunt us, we must remember the triumph of the human spirit, the determination of those who survived, and the courage of those who provided refuge at great risk to their personal safety. Sadly, as we know too well, genocide and other mass atrocities against humanity continue to jeopardize efforts at creating peace and justice in our world. New Democrats stand in solidarity with you today to commemorate all victims of the Nazi atrocities, We stand with human rights defenders worldwide who face daily threats to their safety as they continue to defend human rights and the sanctity of life. As a political leader, I believe we must work to ensure future generations are educated about the Holocaust. I share the hope that our youth will be inspired to be a positive force for peace, justice, and respect for human rights. On behalf of Canada's NDP, I reaffirm my commitment to countering anti-Semitism, racism, and all forms of hate, intolerance, and discrimination wherever it is found. Let us commit to ensure that the world never again knows the horrors of the Holocaust.
Thank you, Anne. I would now like to call upon Jillian Horwitz, a long-standing member of the Holocaust Education Committee, to recite the prayer for the victims.
I recite this prayer today with behind me a memorial to the Holocaust created by Susan Owen. Please take a time to look at some of the inscriptions on there when we are finished today. God, full of mercy, who dwells on high, protector of widows and father of the fatherless, please be not silent and show no restraint on behalf of the Jewish blood that has been spilled like water, but grant perfect rest on the wings of your divine presence in the lofty abode of the holy, pure, and valiant, who shine as the brightness of the heavens. To the souls of our brothers and sisters, 6 million Jewish men, women, and children who were put to death, slaughtered, burned, starved, buried alive, or who suffered any other form of unnatural death at the hand of the accursed German Nazis and their associates and collaborators. May their names be wiped out. In Auschwitz, Treblinka, Majdanek, Mauthausen, and in other death camps in Europe, and who gave up their lives in order to sanctify God's name, because we are at one with their memory, and we pray for the elevation of their souls. Their resting place should be in the Garden of Eden. Therefore shall the Master of Mercy care for them, under the protection of his wings for all time, and bind their souls in the bond of everlasting life. O earth, do not conceal their blood, and let there not be a resting place for their cry. In their merit shall the remnant of Israel return to its rightful place. And as for the Holy One, their righteousness shall be in front of the Lord as an everlasting memory. They will come in peace and will rest in peace. They will meet their rightful destiny at the end of days. And let us all say, Amen.
Thank you, Jillian. We would now like to welcome Valda Levine, Francie Singizer, and Stephanie Hendon to lead the candlelighting ceremony in memory of the 6 million. Candles will be lit by Holocaust survivors Anna and Lena Linetsky, Ann Sector, with her daughter Suzanne Davis, Henry Cinnamon, Sam Koplowitz, Leon Kagan, who is lighting in honor of his mother Clara Kagan, and Abe Silverman.
Anna. Anna.
We light this first candle in memory of our fellow Jews, the 6 million who have perished in many places at the hands of the Nazis in the most cruel and inhumane ways. some by starvation, some by torture, and so many by poisonous gas, but all with Shema Yisrael on their lips. We light this second candle in sacred memory of our brothers and sisters who died in Auschwitz, Dachau, Treblinka, Majdanek, Mauthausen, Bergen-Belsen, and Babi Yar.
We light this third candle in memory of the 1.5 million pure and innocent Jewish children who perished during the Holocaust. Did you manage? No? We light this fourth candle in memory of our brothers and sisters who, as partisans and underground fighters against the Nazis, defended Jewish honor and dignity.
We light this fifth candle in memory of the heroic fighters in the Warsaw Ghetto, who in their darkest hour broke the chains of slavery and freed themselves to fight the Nazi savages, and when they died, did so with dignity. We light this sixth candle in sacred memory of those who opened the gates to freedom, the liberators who set us free. May these 6 candles never let us forget this greatest of human tragedies.
Thank you to our candlelighters and readers for leading us through this meaningful experience. I would now like to welcome Mayor Amarjeet Sohi to bring greetings from the City of Edmonton.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered here today on Treaty 6 territory to commemorate the lives lost during the Holocaust. Today is a day set aside to memorialize the victims of the Nazi atrocities of the World War II, to remember the millions of Jewish victims of the Holocaust and the millions of other victims of Nazism. It is also time to pay tribute to the millions of survivors. It is important to recognize this day because the effects of this tragedy are still felt by the survivors, families, and friends around the world. We have a duty to remember their experiences, resilience, and courage out of respect for their suffering and to try to prevent it from ever happening again to others. This day shows us how important it is to continue our fight against racism, hate, and anti-Semitism, and to create a truly welcoming city for many diverse communities that call Edmonton home. Now more than ever, we must remain alert to the discrimination and oppression that can enable such atrocities to occur. Edmonton has seen an alarming increase in hate-based violence, particularly against those who choose to follow their faiths. The work of our Anti-Racism Advisory Committee is extremely important, and they will create tangible solutions to eliminating this hatred from our communities. And the work of the Edmonton Jewish Federation helps support our goal to becoming a more accepting and open city. You provide cultural and historical education and promote the history and heritage to young generations to ensure the lessons of the past are not forgotten. Their lives, stories, and courage continue to be an inspiration for all of us. And thank you for the contributions that each and every one of you make to our communities. I want to thank the Jewish members of our community who have chosen to call Edmonton home for helping make it a more vibrant and welcoming place to live. And thank you so much for giving the opportunity to be part of this today. And once again, to every one of you, particularly the Jewish Federation, I had the chance to work with many of you over the last 6 months in this role, and I really value the partnership that we're forging. And once again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor Sohi. I would like to invite Rachel Notley, MLA, and official leader of the opposition to offer greetings.
Thank you very much. Allow me to begin by thanking the Holocaust Education Society or committee for their work to bring us all here together for this important memorial. As well, I'd like to offer my appreciation for all of the preceding speakers for their meaningful and in sometimes deeply moving comments today. So important. And finally, allow me to thank the Associate Minister for the declaration that she read out today and that the government has moved on. I think the issues that we talk about today are matters about which we all agree deeply and passionately. And on behalf of Alberta's NDP caucus, I'm so honored to join you for today's observation of Yom HaShoah. Today we remember the 6 million Jews lost in the Shoah. Women, men, children, murdered by the Nazi regime. Guilty of being nothing more than who they were, as so many people have already said today. Here in Alberta, we are truly blessed to live in a land of peace and freedom. And the reality of the Shoah is impossible for most of us to fathom. But there are among us those for whom the shadows of oppression, war, and genocide still loom. They are refugees and survivors of the Shoah and inheritors of its terrible legacy. And we have much, much, much to learn from them about the dangers that hatred, prejudice, racism pose to every one of us within our society, even here in Alberta. Anti-Semitism still exists today. Jews across this province still grapple regularly with how to work against violence and hate. So on behalf of our caucus and our party, I want you to know we see this. We are with you, and we will fight anti-Semitism in all its forms together. We will build strong bridges with Alberta's Jewish community to stand against anti-Semitism, bridges that, with many other folks, will bring us toward a more inclusive, welcoming society. By paying tribute today to the 6 million Jews, those victims of the Holocaust, we also retell their story of bravery and their hope for a better tomorrow, a story that was written during that very dark time. That is our duty. That's why we're here today, to defend the fundamental rights and dignity of everyone in our province, our country, and beyond. It will be the best memorial we can give to those lost, to never forget, to never look away from these tragedies. Today we vow, never again. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily Notley. I would now like to welcome Judge Eric Macklin to read a passage.
Let us say Kaddish, not only for the dead, but also for the living who have forgotten the dead. And let the prayer be more than prayer, more than lament. Let it be outcry, protest, and defiance. And above all, let it be an act of remembrance, for that is what the victims wanted, to be remembered, at least to be remembered. For just as the killer was determined to erase Jewish memory, so were the dying heroes and fighting martyrs bent on maintaining it alive. They are now being defamed or forgotten, which is like killing them a second time. Let us say Kaddish together and not allow others to betray them posthumously.
Thank you, Eric. Rabbi Stephen Schwartzman from Beth Shalom will lead us in the Mourner's Kaddish.
I'm filling in this capacity for my colleague, Rabbi Gila Kane, who could not be here today. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, v'alma divra kirute, v'yamlich malchute, v'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, b'agala u'v'zman kari v'imru, Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mefarach la'olam olmei amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudsha brichu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechamata da'amiran ba'alma v'imru amen yehei shlama rabba min shmaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Schwartzman. Rabbi Zoli Klayman from Beth Israel Synagogue will now recite the El Moleh Rachamim, the Hebrew prayer for the dead.
El Malei Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim. המצא מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים, את כל הנשמות של 6,000,000 היהודים, חללי השואה, שנהרגו, שנשחטו, שנשרפו, ושנספו על קידוש השם, בידי המרצחים, הגרמנים ועוזריהם, משאר העמים. לכן, בעל הרחמים מסתיר בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצור בצור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם, ויעמדו לגורלם לקץ הימים, ונאמר אמן.
Thank you, Rabbi Clayman. And now for a few words of wisdom called the Devar Torah from Rabbi Stephen Schwartzman.
Honored guests, a little girl named Judith Krause was born in the summer of 1937 in Poland. Today she would be 84 years old. But this little girl never saw her 5th birthday because she and all of the Jewish children in her town under 10 years old were taken on a single day from their parents by the Gestapo in May of 1942. 4-year-old Judith was one of the 1 million Jewish children murdered in the Holocaust. She would have been my wife's aunt, our children's great aunt. My friends, the human mind cannot comprehend the murder of 1 million children. And it cannot comprehend the murder of 6 million Jews, fully 1/3 of the entire world's Jewish population at the time, along with millions of Roma, gays, disabled people, and others. And so, as we gather today in solemn assembly to commemorate the Holocaust, it may help us to picture one little girl. Who might she have grown up to be? And the truth is, we cannot know. Her older brother, Avram, survived Auschwitz and Dachau. He was my father-in-law. But Judith and their father Gershon and their aunt Shena and others were all murdered by the Nazis, as were 2 out of every 3 Jews in Europe. The population of Canada today is 38 million souls. Imagine if 25 million of them were murdered because they were Canadian. My friends, we know the facts of the Holocaust, in part because the Nazis so lovingly documented their brutal work with precision, meticulously, and proudly. But we yearn to know more than the facts. We desperately want to know, how is it possible for human beings to descend into such incredible evil? If we knew that, so we hope, we could learn how to prevent this evil from ever happening again. Yet the terrifying understanding that we do not know how to prevent such evil grows from year to year. We used to think that education could prevent hatred, not only hatred of Jews, but other forms of hate as well. And we have come to learn that this is not so, or at least it has not yet succeeded. Even today, even in Canada, even right here in Alberta, there are those who hate and there are those who act on their hate. Jews are not the only target of such hate, but Jews remain a primary target of the haters. And we have seen how easily the haters of Jews have become haters of the Jewish state of Israel. And ironically, some of the haters are themselves targets of hate. But that does not stop them from hating Jews in Israel and in Canada to the point of calling for them to disappear into thin air, which is precisely what the Nazis and their collaborators did to 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. We cannot understand how the human capacity for hate can be so very large. And neither can we understand the human capacity for love. Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial and Research Center in Jerusalem, has documented over 27,000 cases of righteous Gentiles who risked their own lives to save Jews, Jews whom they knew from before the war and Jews who were strangers. And there were more, far more, whose heroism remains unknown. It is now 77 years since the war ended, and we who are gathered here today must be the bridge between the memory of the worst crime in human history and the moral consciousness of those who will come after us. So let us pray, each in our own way, and work each in our own way, so that the words of the prophet Isaiah, spoken almost 3,000 years ago in Jerusalem, will ring true. V'chitetu harvotam le'itim, v'chanitotehem nemazmerot, lo yisa goy el goy cherev, v'lo yilmedu od milchama. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And please join me in saying Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Schwartzman. Under the direction of Ben Ragozin, please join the TT choir in the singing of the song Chai.
Hi, alive. This is our grandparents' song. We sang it to our parents, and today we are singing it. Hi, Am Yisrael Chai. Feel free to join us.
We, the generations born after the Holocaust, have a duty to carry on the legacy of 6 million voices. I thank you all for coming out to commemorate Yom HaShoah and to pay respect to our local Holocaust survivors and their families. Can you please all rise and join the Talmud Torah choir in the singing of Hatikva, the national anthem of Israel? Thank you all for attending Yom HaShoah. Thank you.